Wild Rublev is better than mild Rublev. I'm going to explain what I mean by that later in this video, but I want to welcome you to another edition of the Monday Morning Tennis Rant. And the Madrid tournament just ended, and it was held over the span of 2 weeks for the first time. And as a fan, I don't like it because there was simply not enough tennis happening. Towards the end of the second week, you would turn on the TV and there were no matches going on. While the 2-week format works really well at Grand Slams, I don't like it for Master Series tournaments. I will say that Indian Wells has always done a good job with their scheduling, with their long format. But Madrid this year, the way they scheduled matches, there was simply not enough of them. See, at a Grand Slam, you need 2 weeks because there's a lot of things happening at a Grand Slam. You got the mixed, you got the legends playing, you got the junior tournament, and also the men play best out of 5 sets. So towards the end of a second week in a Grand Slam, you're still going to watch a lot of tennis, and that simply was not the case in Madrid. Now, of course, it didn't help that a lot of players were injured and had to pull out, and I'm going to talk about the injuries on tour later on in this video. So I know that Monte Carlo had a smaller draw and it was only men in that tournament, but that to me is the perfect format. You got so many great matches every single day, and it's a Master Series event that only lasts 1 week. To me, that's one of the most fun tournaments to watch, despite the fact that you can't see the ball. And I want to thank you guys for writing all these comments on my last Monday morning rant, where I talked about the visibility in Monte Carlo, which was horrible, and it was not a lot better in Madrid. In fact, during one of the best women's matches that I've ever seen, I had again a hard time following the ball. And I had to get closer to the TV actually and sit right in front of it to be able to watch that match. And that was some match. Sabalenka and Swiatek played unbelievable. I picked Sabalenka as the favorite before the match because I think the conditions suit her. Madrid is the fastest clay court on tour, and Sabalenka has been playing really well this week. She generally plays well in Madrid. She won the tournament last year, and I thought that she would blow Iga off the court because Iga's kryptonite are big servers, or more generally speaking, power players. This year, Iga lost to Noskova, who's a big server and a power player, and she also lost to Alexandrova, who's another big server and a power player. And Sabalenka surely has a big serve and the ultimate power game from the baseline. And if Sabalenka can keep her unforced errors low, she has the type of game that can put Iga under a lot of trouble. And Sabalenka played extremely well in this match. When she had control of the points, she was dictating play with hitting such deep, penetrating ground strokes, and she was putting Iga under a lot of pressure. But Iga, with her impeccable defensive skills, found a way to win that match in a tight third set tiebreak where she saved several match points. I've said this before, I think Iga can become the female Rafael Nadal. I think Rafa is her favorite player. She's inspired by Rafa, and I do believe that Iga can become the greatest female clay court player in tennis history. Chris Evert has 7 French Open titles. Iga has 3. I do think it's realistic that Iga can break this record. By winning the tournament title in Madrid, she has now won all the big clay court tournaments: Stuttgart, Madrid, Rome, and the French Open. And with the conditions being generally slower at the French Open, she is my favorite to win that title. I made a video about Rublev's outburst in Dubai, and he definitely stepped over the line. He misbehaved. He learned a very tough lesson from that tournament. But interestingly, Rublev's performances on the court after Dubai were terrible for his level, because Rublev is known to be a very consistent player and go very deep in big tournaments. So in Indian Wells, he did win the first round against Murray, but then lost to Lehechka. In Miami, he lost to Mahaj. And once he got on the clay, I thought, okay, he's going to start winning matches. He won Monte Carlo last year, was the defending champion. He gets a bye in the first round, but then loses to Papirin in the second round. And that was a shocking result for me. But even more shocking was the fact that he lost to Nakashima in the second round of Barcelona, again after getting a first round bye. So not only did Rublev lose 4 matches in a row, but he lost 2 matches in a row on clay. And he lost to Nakashima, who, no disrespect to Nakashima, he's a great player. He's not a clay court specialist. That is a match that Rublev has to win, especially on a surface like Barcelona, which should suit him. So obviously the tournament in Dubai affected Rublev in a very negative way. And I was closely watching Rublev's behavior on the court after that tournament in Dubai. And while Rublev did behave, he also played with a lot less intensity and fire. But something that happened in that Nakashima match where I thought, okay, this is the old Rublev, was the following. He ends up losing that match to Nakashima in a second set tiebreak. And after losing the match point, Rublev absolutely demolished his racket on the court. And I thought, the old Rublev is back. I think he's going to start playing better again. And he sure did. In Madrid, he was his old self. He was demonstrative on the court. He did behave. I do think Rublev learned a very tough lesson. He stepped over the line in Dubai. I don't think he's ever going to do that again. But I believe that Rublev needs that fire in his game. He needs to be emotional out there to play his best tennis. So he beat Alcaraz in the quarterfinals, which is a big surprise. Beating Alcaraz on clay in Spain is a tough feat. Okay, maybe Alcaraz wasn't on the top of his game. He's dealing with an injury right now, but despite that, you still got to beat Alcaraz. And then Rublev was very solid in the following matches and beat a very good Felix Auger-Aliassime in a tough three-setter in the final. And as I'm watching these matches in Madrid, I'm seeing the old Rublev, the expressive Rublev, the fiery Rublev, or what I said in the beginning of this video, the wild Rublev. Now, don't misunderstand me. The vast majority of tennis players, independent of their level, when they start misbehaving on the court, when they start becoming negative on the court, this negativity tends to spill over into the next point, into the next game, into the next set, and ultimately players lose matches because of their negativity. This is very much true. Don't misunderstand that when I say Rublev found himself after smashing a racket, I don't like the fact that he smashed a racket. I don't like when players do that, and it's definitely something that's not okay, and it's a finable thing. It's not a good example for the kids. There's no argument about that. However, there are some players who need this outburst of negative emotions to play their game. It is just the personality that they need to stay true to play their best tennis. Now, of course, Roger Federer was able to make a switch where he was a fiery player when he was in juniors, smashing rackets and so on, and he was able to become calmer on the court with less negative emotions, similar to Edberg or Borg. But that's easier said than done, because what happens to some players is when they turn that fire off and they turn off the negative emotions, they also turn off their intensity and their fire. And I think it's 100% what was happening to Rublev in those 4 tournaments before Madrid. He was just too flat emotionally, and he was missing the intensity and the fire. Another player who is similar to Rublev in that regard is Djokovic, as someone who needs to let out the negative emotions every now and then, and he's able to refocus on a match and play his best tennis on the very next point. I do put Rublev and Djokovic in a similar category. And I know what you think. Nick, you are condoning bad behavior. No, I'm absolutely not. I think everybody should behave on the court, and there is a line that you can cross. Djokovic has crossed that line, no doubt about it. Rublev has crossed that line in Dubai and paid a very steep price for it. You got to behave yourself on the court, no doubt about that. And I'm also of the belief that most players will not benefit from showing negative emotions on the court. I am, however, aware that there are players who are just fiery characters on the court, and when they turn off emotions on the court, even negative ones, they lose their intensity and their fire. So for that reason, I do think there are players out there who need to be expressive out there, even if it's negative expressions, to be able to play their best tennis. And now let me talk about Rublev's opponent in the final, Felix Auger-Aliassime. And I made a video about Felix last year that I recommend that you check out. And Felix was dealing with a lack of confidence. In fact, last year there was a stretch where he couldn't win a single match. He kept losing in the first round. And it's good to see that he got his confidence back this week in Madrid and reached the final. His ranking had dropped to 35 in the world, and now he's ranked number 20. Felix has everything that you need to play tennis at the top of the game. He has an incredible, powerful baseline game, strong forehand, strong backhand. He's got a huge serve. He's a phenomenal athlete. But what's lacking, and some of that was visible in the final, is confidence to play his best tennis at the most important stages. He won the first set 6-4 against Rublev, and then down 6-5 in the second, he made some low percentage shots. For example, at 15 all down 5-6, he was way behind the baseline, off the court, and he tried to hit a backhand down the line winner. That is just one small example of what it means to win matches at that level. It's often about confidence and winning the important points in a match, and this is what was lacking with Felix. So this was an important step in the right direction. He's going to use this tournament to build his confidence up and possibly get back to the top 10 this year. Now, Felix did get lucky in this tournament, okay? There's no other way to say it. He was supposed to play Sinner in the quarters, and Sinner withdrew from the match. Then Lehečka, who I picked as the favorite in the semifinal. Lehečka is an unbelievable player. Hits one of the hardest serves in the world. I'm going to talk about Lehečka in a separate video. And I do think that Lehečka had a good chance to win that semifinal against Felix, but he did something to his back and had to retire at 3-all in the first set. But not taking anything away from Felix's performance in this tournament, he did play really well. He beat Ruud, who was in the final of Monte Carlo, who won Barcelona. That's a huge win on clay for Felix, beating Ruud in the 4th round. So I'm not taking that away from Felix. But fact is that we're seeing a ton of injuries on the ATP Tour right now. And in fact, the two golden boys of tennis, Sinner and Alcaraz, are both injured, and both of them pulled out of Rome, and both are a question mark for the French Open. Alcaraz has something wrong with his arm, and Sinner has something wrong with his hip. And I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about injuries in tennis, something that I've talked about in other videos, more specifically about the shoulder and the elbow, and how technical mistakes can lead to injuries and what you have to do, technically speaking, to avoid some of these injuries. I highly recommend that you check some of these videos out. But when we're talking about tennis at the professional level versus the amateur level, I'm going to go to something my dad always used to say. Recreational tennis is very healthy. Professional tennis, on the other hand, is very unhealthy. And I'm going to explain why professional tennis is extremely unhealthy. First of all, you can get hurt in two different ways. You can get an acute injury where you tear a ligament. For example, you roll your ankle or you blow out your knee. Sometimes this is just bad luck. Maybe you step on an uneven spot on the court, you blow out your ankle. I remember one time during the French Open, David Goffin, he stepped on a tarp that was in the back of the court and he hurt himself and had to retire. So acute injuries are sometimes just bad luck. Other times acute injuries can be super complex. Some players get acutely injured more than others, and it's difficult to figure out why. But the thing that is the most frustrating in tennis are the micro injuries. And this is what every single tennis player deals with, whether it's a high-level player or an elite level player. And what are micro injuries? Well, these are injuries that are stemming from overuse, from repetitive motions. And these are going to be unavoidable if you want to play tennis at a high level or at the elite level. In fact, it's these repetitive motions that get you to that level. And every single tennis player that reaches that level is bound to have injuries that are stemming from overuse. Possibly the most common injury is the shoulder, more specifically the rotator cuff. Why? Because the three strokes that I use the most in tennis, which is the forehand, the backhand, and the serve, involve the shoulder in a very big way. Other parts of your body where you can get these overuse injuries are going to be your elbow, your wrist, your knee, your ankle, or your back. Also, some players will suffer strains in their muscles, and these are very frustrating because depending on the severity of the strain, you might be able to continue to play. So if you have a mild strain, you probably can continue to play, but ultimately you're not going to heal properly if you continue to play with a strained muscle, and you're not going to be performing at your best. But the frustrating thing for tennis players, maybe not the ones that are at the top of the game, who are doing well financially, but more the ones that are fighting to survive, is that they will play with micro injuries. They will play with mild to medium strained muscles because they simply need the paycheck. Just think of a scenario where a player has an injury and they're qualified to play in a Grand Slam, and even if they lose in the first round, they're gonna get a big paycheck. I don't blame that player for showing up on the court and playing even with a mild injury, because they are making a living from tennis. If they don't play that match, they make $0. Now, at the lower levels, it's even more brutal. Tell you a personal story. Back when I played college, I used to play at the club level in Germany, where I used to get paid for the matches. And if you don't play, you don't get paid anything. And if you just show up on the court and play your match, you get a set rate, and then you get a bonus if you win your match. So the college season would usually end at the end of April, and then in the beginning of May, I would go to Germany and play matches. And in 3 of those seasons, in my first practice or my first match, I would get injured because I didn't have enough time to prepare for the clay court season. I would get off the plane and jump straight onto the match court, and it was very natural that I was going to get hurt. Now, these were all muscle injuries. One year it was my ab muscle, another year was my hamstring, and another year was my calf. And in each one of these seasons, I continued to play the entire club season injured. Now, I will say that these were mid to mild strains that allowed me to continue to play. It would be very painful in the beginning of the match, and then, as you get into the match, as you get the adrenaline pumping, you feel the injury less and less, and then after the match, you can barely walk. So this is a brutal existence, and it's a very difficult thing to go through. And while it would have made a lot more sense health-wise to not play and let the muscle heal properly, which usually takes 4 to 6 weeks, I was kind of forced to play these matches because, quite frankly, I needed the money. So I'm always on the player side when I hear stories that players stepped on the court injured. Now, I will make a caveat there that when the injury is severe and you can't properly play, in other words, if you don't have a chance to win, but you're stepping on the court anyway to collect prize money, that is not okay. But if you have a micro injury, a mild injury, and you're stepping on the court anyway, I don't blame you, because I did the same thing, and I understand that players are making a living from playing tennis matches. And guys, that is the brutal sport of tennis. If you play tennis at the high level, if you play tennis at the elite level, you are guaranteed to get an acute injury at some point in your playing career, and you're 100% guaranteed to get injuries that stem from repetitive movements, or in other words, overuse. Tennis is a brutal game, and injuries and tennis unfortunately go hand in hand. Now, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about how players are now getting injured more than they did before. And you got to think of it this way. Players now are playing longer than they have before. So the recovery from injuries has improved tremendously. Also, the preventative measures that one can partake in have improved tremendously as well. So it is 100% true that tennis is getting faster and faster. Players have to be very explosive on the court, and players could possibly get injured more now than they have before. It is also true that players can recover from injuries better than in the past, and they can also take preventative measures that are a lot more high-tech than they used to be. And so for that reason, despite the fact that players are going to get injured all the time, because this is just something that goes hand in hand with tennis, you will also see players have longer careers.